We have about an hour for panel discussions. To get started, we have 4 presenters to give examples of their surroundings and their focuses. So we have noticed that their situation varies quite significantly. Well, thank you very much for all the arrangements, and thank you very much for all the interesting presentations. My background is social studies or the history of I'm a historian of philosophy or thoughts. Well, actually, I have learned that there are open databases, and actually I work for an open development or development research firm, which we have been contracted with. And in fact, people are afraid at our university, our researchers are, that they will be taken or robbed away of their credits if they open databases. And all the more for that reason, it's encouraging to hear more about this open access. So there are 2 confusions I would suggest. Since last year, open access has been noticed to be important, from subsidies to scientific research, as we take open access as a blessing. However, researchers that are insightful, that in fact they know that if submissions to journals are not accepted, they eventually are circulated on open access. And therefore, the Cabinet Office has started their efforts on open access, and therefore, it depends on what approach you take amongst researchers of whether open access is for good or the bad. That is my first question, and also related to the first part of discussions today. It was noted that citations are important in opening up databases, and I have come to understand that credit is even more greater in importance, which suggests that knowledge is owned by someone. For instance, I think in terms of Christianity, is that God is almighty and knowledgeable, and however, in the research world, you are claiming ownership on knowledge. And the space exploration, of course, involves a lot of knowledge. And I think it's sound to, in fact, with this given huge, massive pool of knowledge, we should collect wisdom and also foster researches on this pool of research. However, research subsidies as well as research positions are only attainable through claiming your credits, which is regrettable. The research examples, I think, were given this afternoon were made available because the access is open. And from urban environment, Kyushu University has been well advanced in this area, so if Ms. Hoshiko could advise us on what could be done practically, it would be insightful. For data disclosure, opening up of database for the moment has not started at all. So on open access journals, and in fact, when a review is made for applications, the open access journals are used for circulation, is what you have suggested. So it's not open access that's the problem, but the open access journal, rather. The open access in itself even without the open access journal, by using institutional registries, you could register repositories that have been reviewed and finalized. So open access in itself is not a negative thing if a applied paper does not pass the reviews for a journal contribution. Well, this is a very broad perspective or global issue. I think we had planned originally to talk about this later onwards. However, to start with, so amongst the panelists, before the discussions, are there any clarifications amongst the panelists? I think that would be better to clarify. And in the second half of the panel, we will talk about the diverse matters as asked in the question, especially about 1/4 or 1/5 of the audience are librarians. In general, research data is thought to be a separate universe or world from librarians. But going forward, we would like to, in a philosophical sense, give some suggestions on what librarians are expected to contribute to in the future. But before we go into that, we'd like to clarify the presentations first. Any clarifications, if needed, amongst the panelists to start with? I'd like to ask Tanaka Sensei. I was saddened by hearing that database development takes time out of your research. I know part of how it would feel as a librarian. Database developers, who actually takes up the work? Well, I basically believe that researchers still develop databases, but I don't think professors would. So how do you assign database development in practical terms? Do you ask a person, of course, that is to some extent at least related to the research, or what kind of people are assigned in practical terms to develop databases? I've said that it feels bad that you feel as if you've been robbed time out of your research. To be honest, at our research institute, the National Institute of Polar Research, we clearly have a common recognition that the use of data creates value. Of course, we have a lot of observation points of data collection, but we also have in the past massive amounts of data that is dormant without being used and remains so. And of course, we have been charging the data downloads. However, in developing the database, it was a true struggle of time allocation. How much time should you allocate to database development instead of research? And therefore, time constraints exist, and we delegate mostly the work to younger researchers. Younger research, the postdocs mostly take up the work. At universities, I think mostly the students are assigned the task. In that regard, or how should I summarize here? In the past, database experts did not exist in the pure sense. So database development were left to individual preferences, and there were a huge number of fragmented databases that were not useful at all or connected at all to each other or even linked. Database creation or production does need expertise on database development as well as money and time. However, this recognition was non-existent in the past, which is the largest thing that we should notice or notice anew on this occasion. In the past, data development or database development was usually assigned to the newest comer or the younger researchers in most cases. Thank you. And Hoshiko-san has mentioned a co-development scheme or projects, and I think librarians have the same challenge, is the intention of my question. Any other individual clarifications amongst panelists to start with first? I still have a very limited experience. Open databases in many cases are inconvenient. Though the data could be accessed, how could the data most effectively be used is not clear. In the United States, open source and communities come together in figuring out how to use the data, as well as they share use cases as a service, which comes in together or ties in together. However, in Japan, it is still uncertain of how it will develop. Could you give us why the situation exists? Why is it that we have the current situation in Japan, or what are the directions that we're heading for in Japan? Ugonet, for instance, it's been mentioned that it's been existing about 6 years and subsidized by the Ministry of Education. Do you have any tracking of what in what parts of the database were most actively used or effectively used? So first, to give an example. Yes, I'd like to try the best of our experience to share our past usage. Database has been quite open in our community. It is open mostly to the community. Of course, the data is completely open, but a person from outside the discipline, it would be quite difficult for them to access the data as well as to use it effectively to their convenience. Of course, the databases should be the same amongst the researchers as well as non-researchers. Though I think that is the ideal, it would be quite challenging in practical terms. This is because the data content itself is quite academic for science purposes, and to make it usable to non-researchers, it should be more usefully or self-explanatory to non-researchers. It should be organized in that way.
And Ugonet is a very open data, but it's not prepared for use by a general audience. So how to fill the gap? I think that's a task that we have going forward. And one thing that we are doing is for the members of the community. We have 2 training sessions per year talking about these databases and analytics software. We teach people how to use them. About 20 to 30 people participate, and so it's like a workshop. And so we have them plot the data so that they understand how the data should be used. So that was targeted at researchers, so very well received. And in our community, people now use the data much more, but making that more available to the general audience, that's harder. And for the general audience, maybe we can make the website more user-friendly, or put together a manual, or put a video on YouTube explaining how to use it. Maybe those are difficult tasks, but some things that we have to do. Are there any other individual questions for clarifications? I will accept more if there are any. But if not, I would like to ask some questions to the panelists. So in this panel discussion, the theme is research data infrastructure. How can we build that infrastructure? In part 2, Takeda-sensei moderated the session, and I think that there was that question, who is to provide the support and help? And I think the answer is each of us from the members of this panel. And in Japan, there's this entity that was not involved in research data in the past, librarians, and they want to get engaged. And so we want to acknowledge that. Now, the research data infrastructure in Japan, from what kind of historical perspective has it been developed, and how is it going to evolve into the future? That's what I want to know. And what we have learned so far from the panelists is that the user's context is quite different. And even when we say research data, sometimes the data is not for research. Sometimes it's personal data. There are various different situations. And so you're all involved in research data, but what kind of needs were generated amongst the users? What were the demands, and how do you see the demands and needs changing, evolving, going forward? So from each of the domains, can we get a response, please? So in the order of the presentations, please. Research data in registering DOI. So when we started the project, well, we don't know the context, or we didn't know the context when we started, and there were data sites which acted as our model, so we learned from that, and we started. And the one thing that became clear was that putting DOI, well, you have to aim so that you can identify amongst them. And in terms of metadata, it's not so complex. It's simple, generalized. And conversely, in that particular field, it may be a bit lacking. That's what has been developed. And within the experimental project, the context has become clearer. That's the extent that we have come. And what should we do for the future? I started talking before I gave it a thought. So maybe I need to pause about the future. As I said near the end of my presentation, so the number of research data is limited, and we haven't collected all the use cases, although we've accumulated some. And the near-term target is to look at papers and research data and to connect between those different types of things. And that's what we've been looking at. So within a discipline, we should leave it to the domain database for utilization, but cross-disciplinary or between research data and papers across the different types, we want to provide that kind of a connections. JST JAOC is, I think, a very big infrastructure within the Japanese context. And rather than talking about what kind of infrastructure we will provide, you should talk about what are the needs from the user side. Why do you want to apply DOI to the papers, and why are we talking about research data next? There probably were changes in the user needs, and it's probably there's this understanding that, rather than the recognition of the needs for the future, there's probably the needs from the users that there should be DOI for the research needs, and that's why probably that the project is being implemented. So is that true? Is it based on the changing user needs? Well, 2 points. You said it's a big infrastructure. Research data and papers, they're both handled, and so it goes through data site and cross-ref. So we're trying to collect everything that goes out from Japan. So in the Japan Link Center, it's positioned as a foundational entity, and also from papers to research data. As we transition, what has changed is with research data. Well, actually, it's not so different with papers, but you identify and you want to use it for evaluation. So you want to know where it's being cited. So that's the needs that we hear often. And so we should have a standardized identifier to allow that to happen, so that quantitative understanding of the citation can be possible. So I think that's the needs that we have. So Tanaka sensei, well, researcher is defined as someone with needs. So we're in the same position, but from the researcher perspective, what were the needs in the past and how is the need changing today? Do you see that kind of a change? Change in needs? For example, originally, concerning research data, well, individuals collected such data, and there was no motivation for sharing, and there was no need for something like Yugonet. But now there is a need for such systems. So is that based on the researchers' needs? And I think it is, and you're building that kind of infrastructure based on that need. But from a user perspective of research data, when you think about such needs, what kind of changes have you observed or felt? So you're asking what was the driving force to start this kind of project? Yes, talk about the historical context as well. So if we know how the user needs have changed, if we understand the direction, we can have better discussion. So as I mentioned in my presentation, before researchers, well, there was no internet at one time, and so there wasn't a strong network, so you analyze whatever data you had and you could write papers. But now things have changed. So if you see one phenomena, you have to verify it with various different data. As Nose-san said, you can't just look at this. You can't just have that one person with the flashlight. You have to illuminate with many people. And if you had a piece of data, you could write a paper in the past, but now you have to collect various data, and a lot of satellite data is now being made available from foreign sources. So it's better to analyze all different kinds of data simultaneously. That will yield better results. That is the reality. So to collect a lot of data quickly, they are in a better position to come up with better outcomes. So our analysis software allows the collection of large volumes of data at one time, and you can plot them together. And I think there is a strong need for such things. And the unexpected use from our perspective is in terms of developing international networks. We go to the developing countries and we get the cooperation of the local people and we collect the data. And the people who actually collect the data, recently, they want to see the data themselves. So they're asked to collect the data and they ask, what is this data? And they want to plot the data. They want to actually see the data. And by learning how to use it, their motivation is heightened and their capacity is enhanced. So there is this benefit for capacity building. So that's a major factor now. So simply being able to plot the data quickly is important. So the visibility of the activity is important, and that has a feedback on the research infrastructure, and you need that kind of system, yes. So next, Oyama sensei, I understand there's a different context. Data in informatics, we from many years ago, from 1960s, 70s, text corpus or text database has been developed. And so we have that kind of database, and then we have the Yahoo dataset, which are coming from completely different activities. So you're handling various different types of data. So there are diverse needs that you are trying to react to, and the needs themselves concerning research data, looking at it from informatics perspective, changing quite drastically. And for the next stage, you don't know what is to come. I think that may be your response. But from that perspective, from the informatics perspective, if you look at the research data, what do you see in terms of change in consumer needs? Well, first of all, for one thing, there's this issue of scale or size and the cleanliness of the data. Up until some time ago, technology was not so advanced, and so natural language processing or visual processing, there was this technology that was accumulated gradually. And I think that was the centerpiece of research. In order to do that kind of research, you have to have clean data, well sorted out data in order to do the research. And that kind of data, even if small in scale, was useful for research. Of course, bigger the better. But at that time, even if it's small, it was still useful for research.
And of course, it's costly to create data. So even if it's small, if it fits the research well, then that's the kind of data that you wanted to create meticulously and carefully. And technologically, it wasn't sufficient. So something that operates in any environment would not be thinkable. So the target is to create a data that can be used under certain circumstances. So that's the kind of data that was needed. And so for a specific study, you wanted to have a specific data set, and research is prepare the data for specific research purposes and use them in many cases. But recently, the deep learning and other statistical approaches have been developed, and the artificial intelligence may not be the right word, but the statistical approaches have been developed, and because of it, if you just have data, you can generate some results. That's a trend that you see more often. If that is the case, then not dedicated data, but raw data. If it's massive, then you can use it many ways from different perspectives. So something that you develop meticulously for a certain purpose cannot be used for any other purposes, but these massive data sets can be used in many ways. If you identify new ways, then that in itself can be a new research field. So there's more focus on these kinds of data. That's one point. And secondly, traditionally, technology was for a small field that was closed. For example, language processing. If you have a corpus, you are able to do research for image processing or the video processing. If you have the database for that, you are able to do it. But in recent years, in the informatics, research is not closed in some fields, but there are research across fields, and so the themes are getting larger. So the artificial data cannot capture everything, and in reality, in the society environment, you have to use data that is made in the society. Otherwise, it wouldn't be useful. So the data that comes from the actual system is required. And as we speak, the log data, there's not much log data because the data that reflects the human behavior is very difficult to get. Well, researchers want to use them, but there can be no generation of such data. So there's a dilemma, or there are other elements as well. So we are bound. We are in a bind. So open data or closed data. Well, if it's you can't solve these problems if you just look at a bunch of data. So how to solve this issue is going to be a challenge going forward. Thank you. I have a question. Unlike with the physics of the upper atmosphere, in the case of physics of the atmosphere, you want to generate data. So for that purpose, you want to create this or that kind of a data. In the case of informatics, that's not the case, right? Well, you mentioned log data. Well, before you know it, it can be a research theme. Well, blog data, well, it wasn't made for purpose for research purpose. But why can you research it? So I think there can be a reverse flow. Informatics is different from computer science. Informatics, humans can be target of the research. Humans and society. Information is generated from such. So if you want to deal with information, you have to go back to the source of information necessarily. And humans, well, the modality, of course, it is conceivable to create a model, but through observation, you identify something, you discover something. That kind of a story is there naturally, but if you apply a certain model to humans, that kind of a research approach is not viable. So you use data as it is and observe human behavior and how you can effectively use it. So there are two stages. In the initial stage, there's data that is usable that cannot be designed. So you want to do something and you only have this or that data, and so from this viewpoint you can do something similar to your purpose. So there can be, if you find a good data set, then you can do a good research. So that's about how to identify good data for you. Have I answered the question? Thank you. So next, Ms. Hoshiko. Well, you have not started your activities, but at least around you, you have many people who are talking about research data. And for example, if you look at researchers in your university, library, doesn't the library work on research data? Well, do you call it needs, expectations, or a complaint? Well, this kind of change. Now, have you, after coming to this industry, well, of course, this is about the time frame as well, but in informatics and also in the geomagnetic field, these have been established fields. There have been a lot of history, long history of our data, and you know there are users. But from the perspective of library, when it comes to the research data, if you think the researchers as the users, what have been the changes and what is the current status? Right, the researchers. Do they come to the library about data consultation? Not much, but just once. About 10 years ago, there was Kyushu University did a study about mulberry or the silkworm, and for decades, the record of nurturing of silkworm is there at the library, and researchers came to me and asked us to put such a record to a database. Well, that was temporary, but database for the development of silkworms, we actually made such a database open at the library. But within the library, regularly, we do a replacement of the computer system in the library, and along those lines, the platform for making the database open has changed, and so this silkworm database, it's difficult for us to show that as before. So the data itself is now managed in the project, and the library has withdrawn from the management of that particular data. Now, library is about books, so the paper-based materials is what we consider when we talk about the library. Now, with respect to the silkworm database, is it digitized? Is it on hard disk, or is it paper-based materials? Well, people in the Meiji era, they didn't have computers, but was it kept? Well, it has been kept in many cases, but in the library, have you seen any changes in the needs? Well, in the case of silkworm, we have paper-based records, and separately from that, there's also digitized database that was made available to the outside people. Right now, the format, it's not a paper, it's digitized, possibly, perhaps. So in this respect, the way the data is kept may have changed. Well, that's what happened 10 years ago, and you talked about the paper-based materials, the digitization. And we're talking about open data and open science. I think people have high expectation on that with respect to the roles to be played by the library. What roles can the library play? Now, do you hear such voices? Right now, the researchers, not researchers, but within the university URL, what should be done going forward? We hear those voices. So far, have heard stories about the needs and the behavior of the users from the perspective of a platform, but the users are there. So the research data to be digitized and made open, that's not the end of the story, and that's actually where we are. So we have the issue of licensing, and also we have to have a proper checking when we receive the data because of the things on the ground. We have to be careful about something. Unless we resolve some issues, we cannot move forward. I think there are many issues. You might say everything is a challenge, but from the perspective of practitioners, if you can mention anything, please, then there may be commonalities and differences. I think we can better see what the current situation is. Anyone who can say anything? If not, Kato-san, you have been in this field of practice, JST. People have expectation on you, and DOI can be on the research data, but this has to be charged, or this has to be free of charge, some people say. And also the issue of licensing may not be there, but when data is collected, maybe some people think it's a trouble, or you may have received complaints from this viewpoint. Well, as we do a practice, do you have any points that we have to be careful about? There's not much I can share with you here, but 2 points. To repeat, there are not many use cases, so what kind of metadata should be there? Well, the purpose is not visible before making a decision. So for those people who put data, the things that we want may not have been communicated to them well. So the people who want to do registration may be perplexed. That's one point. And the other point is the flow for registration from the university library to NAI to depository or the participants in the IID. Well, there is a direct involvement of university library, and this kind of a flow is taking root, is being established. So we hope to make sure that things can go smoothly going forward. So these are the 2 points about a practice that I have been thinking of. So you have to listen to various people's voices so that things can go smoothly. Tanaka-san? Well, right. In the previous session, this point was made a lot. The licensing, credit, the appreciation, the acknowledgement. At UGONET, for UGONET, this has been things that we have been looking at as with a concern. UGONET, the data providers groups grouping, and people, there's no such a data policy of UGONET, but PI is deciding the policies. So from a UGONET credit or data policy to be decided, no, we don't do that. If we do that, it would be quite troublesome, so we didn't do it. So as a result, well, what do we do now? Data is made available openly, but when it comes to software, when it's used, the data policy, when you use this data, you have to contact this or that person. That's shown.
However, you can plot it as you wish without contacting, as it's left that way, and it's left to the conscience of the researchers. Researchers, however, though there are no precedent cases, have raised concerns of unauthorized use, which have been raised for still some time, and that's adding some pressure. We only have word search, and therefore how much printing has been done or published is unknown unless you actually word search yourself, which is a pressure, and constantly we have in mind what could be done to address this. Informatics, for instance, of Oyama sensei, it may lead to litigation, which is what I felt. Are there any practical insights? Yes, there's a potential concern. So we actually have very cautious attitude to data provision. Private data providers, of course, are naive and are more casual. But from our experience, we have restrained them in some cases, in some practical examples. Before, though it is not the case today, for instance, the service usage agreement does not have intellectual property rights in it. So, for instance, there are suggestions that the data usage agreement should be rewritten before data provisioning. So, we need to check the usage agreements of usage rights between the users, and that's been also the task that we have been taking and checking agreements. And of course, to some extent, this is out of conservative precaution, but we haven't seen any litigation yet. Hoshiko-san, do you have any examples of, for instance, paper publications being requested by a user, and did you have any cases where you had to check the copyright issues regarding the database? The digital data of what our library has, as we've started recently a digital servicing, we have in fact search queries that also show images as well as articles. With this, we have a rising number of requests for using digital information, which were mainly in the past from researchers of our university, or who at least knew where the digital format was located. We also see a rising number of non-research or people from outside our university requesting this, and also more casual requests from community users. Therefore, request responses on where the master data is stored, as well as in what data format. The library has to have more micro management or administration. For the time left, one reason that we have invited Mark Parson is because of research data. In each domain, we have a sharing of research data. However, the issue here is, based on the status quo, a mega trend is that we're going to further open up our databases to non-researchers or to outside the domain. In expanding the users of our databases, what should be dealt with ahead of further broadened open access to databases? I'd like to also invite comments from the floor as well, especially. One positive response, for instance, any suggestions of what you would do or what your discipline would do, or what kind of information would be facilitating or encouraging for writing more papers. Of course, we've come to recognize that various issues need to be still cleared, but what platforms would help you to enable more research paper writing? In various ways, from heterogeneous aspects, we have very complex, entangled issues. Though having said so, the situation is encouraging for advancing the research community, for further broadening the open databases. And RDA will host its plenary next March in Tokyo. And are there any incentives to that time date or timeline that would be most encouraged to hear from the floor? I'm sorry to take the opportunity again to ask a question that I asked earlier to Hoshiko-san. Experimental science. Compared to humanities, there are labs that have far greater amounts of research funding. And I think that's the key of what they're going to do with their research funding. And also, it's well understood that people who are trying to claim research outcome may not be ready or the first to open up databases. Talking about open access and open data, as because of the falsified articles, research articles that were published, the universities are becoming more negative in the sense of open data and open databases. However, today we have highlighted the positive aspects of what could be discovered with from the databases that we have existing. And even if it is negative or positive, in fact, we could not expect, unless we had the internet or the network facilities, to in fact gather all this data, which suggests that the methodologies of science study has changed fundamentally. And also, you should have a social cause that is well justified to apply for a certain or huge amounts of research subsidies. And originally, researchers were independent. In fact, after 10 plus years, for instance, the research styles were very independent for conducting research over 10 plus years and making a discovery. In fact, the universities, their value rests on the archives that they have. And therefore, maniacs were delving into those assets of documents, and they were in fact, by conducting longer terms of research of 10 plus years, made discoveries. However, the universities and libraries have opened up in digitizing their data storage. However, the issue is that it's still soft-patched, I would say, in the sense that we have still varying circumstances or stances. And this is an excellent opportunity, in my opinion, to create a new culture where people from outside a certain domain or discipline could voice their interests by, in fact, connecting the vault of information that universities and institutions have. And there are quite a large number of people who are waiting for that outside the research community as well, which is also truly meaningful as well. Well, especially researchers in economics or social studies, for instance, trade and forex, as well as corporate data. If, in fact, you match all those elements, there are analyses that suggest that some data statistics are misleading. And the fragmented database, when collectively combined, in fact, can bring new discoveries. And there are quite a number of missing links that could be established by opening up data as well as opening databases. So I think we have every reason to be encouraged to positively address open data and open databases. Yes, it's well taken that databases as well as open data and open databases have attractions to a broader audience. But with the time left, I think it's time to close this panel discussion. Thank you very much to all the panelists as well as all to the questions. We'd like to applaud them for their contribution.